Hi there, I'm Judy Holland, and welcome to Happy Nest, the podcast where you can hear the latest research and best advice for living well when your kids leave home. Join me as I interview experts and explore how to reinvent yourself during this critical passage. I hope you'll head over to judyhollandauthor.com and check out my new book, Happy Nest, Finding Fulfillment When Your Kids Leave Home. Are you feeling anxious about the coronavirus? You are far from alone. That's why I'm talking today with psychologist Jelena Kecmanovic, aka Dr. K. She's founder and director of the Arlington, D.C. Behavior Therapy Institute and an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. Jelena has published articles and chapters on depression, anxiety, CBT, and relationships. She's going to give us tips based on psychological science on how to deal with the coronavirus uncertainty. I'm here today on the Happiness Podcast with Jelena Kecmanovic, also known as Dr. K. Jelena is just the person we need to hear from this week in the midst of so much coronavirus panic. Jelena, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
So Jelena, I know that you're a psychologist, and I know that you have written about and looked into panic and anxiety over things like this. View of your patients and your perspective, how are people trying to get a grip on coronavirus anxiety?
So, as you can imagine, all our clients, all our patients are talking about it. I think it almost happened overnight. 1 week, barely anybody was talking about it. And next week, every single one of our clients was talking about it. So, people are anxious, but people are also experiencing other emotions. I mean, sadness at the loss of all the things that they normally would enjoy, and frustration at what's happening, and certain level of anger, potentially at the officials who are, who they're perceiving are not helping the situation, and so forth. And so, how people are trying to cope with anxiety? Well, I think that they're doing the best they can, and they're resorting to sort of what they typically try to do when the anxiety shows up, and that is on a good side. I think people are aware that they still have to have some outlets for recreation and coming together with people and exercising, even though they're changing routines dramatically, of course, for exercising. So instead of going to the gym or yoga studio, they're going outside. They're going to Rock Creek Park. Rock Creek Park has never been more visited than that I've seen in the last 20 years. And so, so they're trying to do relaxing activities, still getting some exercise, trying to focus on getting enough sleep. A lot of people are working from home, and they have slightly more flexible schedules because of that. So, a decent amount of people are able to get some rest and some relaxation strategies in. On the other hand, as usual, there are these, we call them in psychology maladaptive strategies, meaning not the helpful strategies that we all resort to. I mean, we're humans, and we don't like the feelings, the physical sensations, of anxiety. We don't like negative thoughts, anxious thoughts, worry thoughts. So we often resort to distraction. We distract ourselves by binge watching Netflix, by marathon sessions of Fortnite and other video games, by drinking too much. Alcohol consumption, I am sure, is increasing these days. Overeating, just all these strategies that sort of take us away from our anxious feelings and thoughts, from our pain. And
how we transcend? Okay, rather than doing all these maladaptive strategies, Jelena, how do we transcend this? I would call it existential anxiety. Of course, I'm a journalist, not a psychologist. How do we get past this?
Sure. So first of all, there's self-compassion in order. So, being self-compassionate about Even distraction, has to be used sometimes, so it makes us feel better. I mean, these are pretty stressful times. We need escape from time to time. However, I think it's very important to be mindful when we are really, running in the direction of avoidance of anxiety. And interestingly, avoidance, what people might not think of avoidance is, obsessively checking the news of coronavirus, right? People do it, it seems, all the time, every 10 minutes, they're going on social media, they're going on news feeds, they're watching TV and so forth. And, it seems again that's, I'm just checking to see what's new out there. However, that's also kind of an escape strategy in a way. People are trying to get reassurance, basically, or, hopefully find answers so they can escape this negative feeling, right, that they have. Yeah. And, so catching yourself and being mindful of this, that we call it, what you resist persists, that, these emotions that you run away from temporarily, they work, the strategies work temporarily. That's why we keep doing them. Right. They really, it's kind of, I have this little silly metaphor, but a lot of people can relate to that. Think of anxiety as a little tiger, and, tiger comes along and we don't like the tiger to hang around us. Basically, we don't like, again, these feelings and thoughts of anxiety. So we feed the tiger. So these avoidance strategies basically feed the tiger. Tiger goes away. For a while, we're good. Whoa, great. The tiger has gone away. But what happens? Tiger has become bigger, and next day he comes and he comes back and he's bigger this time, right? So we fed it. So what do you do instead? Again, watch for over-reliance on these various avoidance strategies, and try to notice when you're having accelerated, or increased anxiety, when you're having these feelings in the body. Sometimes it's easiest actually to notice, like, here I go, here I'm getting a little tight, here I'm feeling a little maybe sweaty, my heart rate might be going up, my throat is closing a little bit, I just, in my stomach, I feel it. A lot of people feel anxiety in the body. That's usually one of the first signs, and being kind of watchful and noticing, like, okay, here we go, the wave of anxiety is coming on, and then doing the best to sort of ride the wave. I mean, it's, it is about mindful acceptance of this, and realizing that these are stressful times, and these are evolutionary inherited emotions that are going to show up in unpredictable, uncertain, fearful times, and that's okay.
What about the concept of, seeking meaning, a larger purpose, a mission? With me, when I'm worried about things, I go into what I think is my contribution to society. I'm a journalist. I find out information. I try to disseminate it and make it simple so people who are busy can understand. And to me, I find a type of transcendence in that, right? Because I have a larger purpose. What about that concept?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And sort of getting to that, when I say, accepting, so these feelings, which we actually don't have control over, even though we think we might, but we don't, and refocusing on behaviors that are aligned with our meaning in life, that are aligned with our values in life, that are aligned with how we want to be in the world, what matters to us, what makes us sort of get up in the morning. Nietzsche famously said, if you know why of life, I'm paraphrasing, but if you know the why, you can survive any how, so meaning however hard life gets, and indisputably it's hard right now, we are able to transcend that if we can connect to these source of meanings. And that they're going to be different for different people.
What about you? And I could probably answer that for you, but you can answer it better. What's your larger purpose? What, with your training and with what are you, certainly people are coming to you anxious. You get a kind of a big dump load, I think, of anxiety on you all the time. How do you dissipate that? And what is your larger purpose?
Sure. Well, that's a nice question. Thank you. That's twofold. One big source of purpose is, of course, being there for my patients. And, I actually used to be an academic. I was kind of, behind the ivory tower for many years, and then transitioned into mostly being a clinician. And it has been, I have to say, a very, very, purposeful transition for me, because, I sometimes feel in that 50 minutes, I can, even if I help a bit, client, a patient of mine, I've done more good in the world than, writing 5 academic papers, each of which is going to be read by, 5 other academics, right? so it's really, it's poignant. Not every session, you feel that you've made a difference and so forth. But when you do, when it works, it really connects you with this, okay, well, why am I here on this earth? And then in the same vein, I think my relationships, my family and my friends, provide similar source of meaning, that I am somebody who can listen. You can listen, who can tolerate pain a lot, right? Who can sit and listen to people talk about negative and painful experiences, and I don't have to run away from it. I think that there is that, we all have gifts. I think there's a little bit of a gift there that, I can tolerate and I can be here with you, and it's okay. We are all in it together, kind of thing. And, there is this other side of my professional life in which I find a lot of meaning as well. And that is the remnant of me being academic. These days, because I have the academic background and I still very much keep up with the science of psychology, I have found this gap, we call it science practice gap in psychology. I found this gap to be enormous, even bigger than I thought when I was just a professor, because I felt, that world and what people are discovering. And there's some really good studies coming out of psychology. I mean, we have some problems, of course, in the in that field, but there's some good things coming out, and yet very few of those things are being translated to the public. And the pop psychology kind of is very disconnected from what we know in science. So it's kind of been a mission of mine in more recent professional life, like last couple of years, to do my bit in translating, right? To sort of take the science and translate it and bring it to wider audiences by writing for general public. I'm working on a book and about anxiety, actually. So that's, that does keep me going. Even during this crisis, I have to say, I've been kind of almost called to write about anxiety. I've just finished the first draft of an article for the Washington Post about, how to deal with all different emotions that are showing up as we are sequestered at home and practicing social distancing and so forth, so forth. I've noticed, yes, that keeps me going.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. Well, so first of all, you're actually, it's very interesting to me from my perspective of journalism that you are kind of bridging the gap, or, crossing the chasm between being a researcher and a clinician. I have interviewed probably thousands of psychologists and different therapists over many years, and that's interesting. I often find different thinking, and truthfully, I hugely appreciate the academics. And the academics, there may be 5 people sometimes reading their books, but I'm one of them, and then I try to pass it on in another way. So I appreciate, quite honestly, both sides of it, and I would be not so good at sitting and absorbing all the negativism, but that's I have a different way of processing because I'm different. I think all the people out there, have different skills and different abilities, and everybody needs to tap into what's the meaning, what brings them joy, what's the larger purpose, and how do we serve the greater good? Because I think that is really the thing that, to me, dissipates concern and worry. When I'm serving in a way that I'm tapping my top skills to do so.
Absolutely. And related to that, I've been thinking how this very, very unique time whereupon, a lot of people are stuck at home, working from home and taking care of the children, while that's stressful and they have to multitask, taking care of children, working from home, still I've been seeing a bit less busyness. There's a decrease in this everyday, hectic life busyness, right? Taking kids to this activity, that activity, finishing up this project, running to this thing, meeting with friends for happy hour in this restaurant, planning this trip. So, this busyness that I think a lot of us get so lost in and kind of, lose track of what is important. And, so this is a particular time, while incredibly hard and stressful and for a lot of people, also, potentially financially, maybe even catastrophic. I think there's an opportunity for growth, actually, for psychological growth, because, when we become a little more quiet, when we slow down a little bit, when, these everyday pursuits, are attenuated a bit. We, I think there's opportunity there to kind of reevaluate, to reflect back on one's life and reevaluate one's priorities, kind of where have I been, what have I done, and what really, what makes me tick,
Right, absolutely. And that's so interesting to me as my book, Happiness, Finding Fulfillment When Your Kids Leave Home, which just came out just weeks ago. I actually look at that very thing because I have 3 kids and they range 21 to 26. 2 of them just boomeranged back out of college yesterday because the colleges have just shut down. So my kids have 2 kids, sad about it and shaken up about it, which brings me to my next question. I'm not hauling a 6-year-old around or an 8-year-old. I'm feeding and listening to a 21-year-old who is a former national champion whose season just blew up, and a senior in college. They've walked into the house happy to see the Great Dane, but really kind of shocked over everything. How do we, as people with older kids whose lives have been ripped out from under them, Again, you and I, we have a different perspective. We've been around a little longer, and we've seen more than someone in their 20s. How do we help these kids psychologically who are rattled because 3 days ago their life was completely different and all their friends were there, and so was the movie theater and the library and everything else?
Absolutely. Well, I have a son who is about to go to college in the fall. So I'm actually, I'm about to be empty nester, which you talk about. So, and my son's high school, of course, has also moved to online instruction. And so I've been observing that. And I think, that generation, they are, one thing they have going for them, they are, I do think, much, much, much more comfortable using technology for socializing, for staying in touch, for doing pretty much everything. It's like the phone is another pen, and it is even compared to some of us who've kind of become somewhat proficient in technology. I think it is different from them. So as much as we love to bash technology, I think this, for them, this is going to be a hugely protective factor. The instruction will continue online. They stay in touch with each other. A lot of times they do it anyway. It's of course hard not to see people face to face, but I think that will be a huge protective factor, and especially using video chats where you can basically almost feel like you're there with the person. Beyond that, I think what we can do is encourage them to be creative in terms of creating new routines, to still engage in self-care, to get some exercise and sunlight and enough sleep and so forth, because all of these things we know are protective factors for both psychological as well as physical health. And so not to kind of, if this is what I did in college, I practiced this sport and I only did that. Well, you can't do that right now. What can you still do?
Right.
That's a typical therapist question. Given that this happened, what can you still do, right? And how can you reinvent your routines to still serve you well, but changing the modality and changing the exact way you do this or that. And then another thing I think is that there's, again, talking about this opportunity, this is opportunity to savor, in a way, some quiet family time, something that, again, we get so rarely. We are all together cooped in, whether it's savoring, a good meal that we make, or it might be almost reminiscing and savoring. So, watching some movies that we watched with our kids 10 years ago and watching it together, kind of reminiscing about the time, before this coronavirus time. And we know this from psychological research, again, that savoring, whether in present or, savoring sort of the positive memories, also greatly impacts psychological health of course, in a good way. So I think that there is, again, opportunity to do all of that.
Right. No, absolutely. And interestingly, in my book, Happiness, I did a couple chapters. I've interviewed lots of young adults, and I used to have an online magazine for parents of teens. I love young adults. I love millennials. I don't complain about millennials. They are my teachers for technology. I hire them. I take them out of cafes and off university to say, here's $20. Can you explain this to me? So I'm 60. I need like some help. But anyway, I've written this very same thing and done lots of research with people like you that are both clinicians and researchers about boomerang kids. And actually what I say is if you've got kids back for a while, I never expected to have a boomerang in 3 days because my kids were very happy in college. But I am completely on your page here with regard to savoring the time and recognizing life is finite. As an empty nester, you come to realize, my sibling is sick, my friend is dying, life is finite. We get this kind of some of these existential twangs, and we realize time runs out. And this actually is a time to turn things a little on its head and say, okay, I have 2 out of 3 kids, young adults in the house now. I wish I had all 3. The other one's out of college. And this is a special time. We had I don't think my son meant to have his 21st birthday dinner here last night, but we had a cake and we had some talk and we listened.
How wonderful. Right. Yeah. How wonderful that you were, able to be part of that. Right.
Right.
We wouldn't have otherwise, right?
Probably better for me than for him, but no, not necessarily. He actually is delightful. But I'm saying, I think it's just like start my book with a chapter on spirituality and how, the Buddhist theory of impermanence, that we realize kids leave, friends die, things happen. Even if you get a root canal, you realize that tooth will never be the same again. But if we realize these things, and I think in embracing these things, we can start finding meaning, start finding purpose, start steering ourselves maybe with a little more mindfulness toward what we're supposed to do. But let me bring us back to the concept of isolation and working at home. And that's different for all of us, right? I mean, I just finished a book, and so I got used to organizing and structuring my time at home, but it's weird. It's weird. So tell me, and especially if you're not reclusive, I'm a huge extrovert. So what are your ideas? You said you just wrote an article about how do we cope with this weird Twilight Zone kind of isolation that just rained down on us days ago.
Yes, exactly. Or very, very suddenly. And that's probably the hardest thing. It's very hard to change so profoundly, so suddenly. Humans are, deep down a very resilient species and adaptable species. And so do trust that our, flexibility and ingenuity is going to shine here. And, people are creating, again, it's about creating new structure. Structure is important as much as we, again, have love-hate relationship with structure. Psychologically, we know structures are really important. So, keeping this structured living whereupon you still wake up about the same time as you would if you were to, going to work outside home and taking a shower and getting dressed and sitting down at the desk. I was at the book reading of Salman Rushdie years ago, and they asked him, what is your writing process? There's always somebody in the audience asking a writer, what is your writing process? And he said, my writing process is I get up, take a shower, get coffee, and I sit down at the desk at 9, and I take a lunch break, but otherwise I don't leave my desk and I write. That's my writing process. Yeah. And it's basically that is now your work, and structure it in such way, that you don't have access to other distractions, that you, if at all possible, you have a sequestered, quiet space. That's again hard often with kids at home, but parents can switch and give each other some privacy and quiet time for chunks of time, because chunks are also important, because if you get distracted, interrupted every 15 minutes and half an hour, we know it's going to take you another 5-10 minutes to get back into your work, and then it's going to be incredibly inefficient. So
can I talk about the idea? Can you expand on the idea of a designated workspace? I've done reading on, in positive, the whole Martin Seligman UPenn School of Positive Psychology and I've been so interested in the idea that we have kind of, I don't have the words you have in psychology, but we have imprinted on our minds kind of an idea of a space. So if I, for example, I cook a lot of Italian food, if I were to go work on my dining room table, I'm going to get up and make a marinara sauce. So I have to shut myself. Yes. I have a little library and I shut myself in. After I do my exercise, I eat a protein bar, I bring a decaf coffee and a big tub of water, and then I shut myself in my library so I can't get out. And I've imprinted on this space that's what it is. Now I have 2 kids that just came home and they've been working in libraries, going to athletic practice. Now here we are, right? And we don't have a lacrosse team here. Tell me about that. How might people help kids set up a space so they're not distracted by other things?
Yeah, one of the simple technological tricks is to shut off internet. And I think I am a big proponent of using technology for good when you can do that. So either temporarily shutting off your internet on your computers if you don't need it for work. And so it's kind of, the idea is, we call it in psychology, either you can be working on what you're doing or you can be staring at the blank screen. The idea is that's okay. Staring at the blank screen is okay, but eventually you get bored of staring at the black screen, and you're going to start working. But the idea is that literally preemptively, shut all these possible sources of distraction. And phones here are huge, right? Phones with all the dings and bings are incredibly distracting, right? And so if you're going to have a phone around, definitely putting it on airplane mode. And there's a researcher from Georgetown, who has studied a lot of relationship with phone, and it can be good and how it can be bad. And one of the findings they publicized that they got and they publicized is that at least bunch up the notifications, right? So if you think, okay, I still do need to get those notifications, they're important because they're letting me know this or that, then have them all come once in once an hour. Or once every 30 minutes, and let them all come at once, kind of in a predictable fashion. Or again, turn off the phone, or put it on airplane mode for a certain amount of time, so that you at least have half an hour, hopefully whole hour blocks where you can actually deliberately, mindfully focus on work and not be distracted. Because however much we think, oh, I'm not distracted by this, phone doing this or that, we are. The phone, there's a reason why they designed all the stuff on the phone. They have psychologists working for them, right? And they know how to harness people's attention. So we have to kind of work against that.
That's
right?
That's the dark side. That's terrible, but that's right. Oh, yes. The psychologists are telling people how to distract us. Right?
Yes, exactly. Oh, yeah. Oh, very much so. Because again, it goes to their bottom line, right? But we have to, be again deliberate about this and to say, okay, it's not like I'm going to shut myself off from people. It's not gonna. I'm not gonna get a message if a friend messages me. But then again, do it. Create a schedule. Do it in some regular intervals, and that shows to really improve our psychological well-being, but also increase our tolerance for uncertainty. There's this idea that these days we actually much worse than tolerating uncertainty. There's a phenomenal paper that came out recently looking at trajectory of cell phone penetration in relation to intolerance for uncertainty, which is a concept that's been studied in psychology for a long time. And there is incredible correlation there.
Wow.
So which is kind of fascinating to me. So this idea that...
me too.
Yeah. When you're feeling, feeling any of these negative emotions, right? The first thing you go is toward the phone. For what? For distraction, for reassurance, for where's my adult child, a teenager, like I feel kind of a pang of worry and so forth. Oh, let me text him or her, like
find my friend. How about that find my friend thing? You can see where my husband likes to see where my kids are, and I'm like, what are you doing? He's well, this one's walking here, that one's driving there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what are you doing?
Exactly, but we do that for everything, right? Let me go take a hike in Rockery Park, which is not like a big mountain, right? Oh, let me check what kind of temperature is going to be, what kind of weather, right? Generally, this area, but let me double check on GPS, So it's this constant checking, reassurance seeking, distraction that we use phones for, which leaves us actually really poorly able to sit sit with
Yes.
the existential fact of uncertainty, which does, of course, bring up some negative feelings.
You know that place, Jelena, that's in Georgetown? I don't know what it is, but I think they give everybody a free cupcake or they put them on the radio or something. And there are these huge lines of people, often Georgetown students, and I can see them there. And literally, I never can find one that isn't on the phone as they wait in this long, snaking line. And they're all doing something on their phone. Usually, it doesn't look like they're talking on their phone. They're doing something because it's in their hand and it's not near their mouth. But
exactly.
That's
from boredom, right? It's in that moment the emotion that might be coming up is boredom or frustration that it's taking that long. So again, some negative thoughts and emotions are showing up. We don't like them, so let's run away from them.
But if you escape from boredom, then that's kind of the opposite of things that I've been looking at in second half of life. I mean, we need to kind of get a grip on the stillness and work through it, and we have more power. That's why we all go to yoga classes and meditate, right? So this is kind of backwards, isn't it?
Yes, oh, absolutely. It really, again, it's that little tiger, right? In short term, it's helpful because, okay, now I'm not bored, I'm less frustrated. And yet the tiger grows and comes back with a vengeance, right? And next time in a uncertain situation or situation that provokes any of these negative feelings, you're going to feel them stronger. They're going to become bigger. And that's partly how we end up with, higher incidence of anxiety disorders than ever in history.
Wow.
Which is almost 20%, so, and that's, the biggest presenting problem that we see, right, every day in our office. So that, that's, we have culturally created a bit of a pickle for ourselves. And
Wow,
I'm hoping we'll find ways out of it.
But another huge problem is, I devour psychology. I actually read lots of academic papers, and isolation, right? I mean, that's another giant, that is just a resounding, that's a chorus, that's a theme. Every time I turn around, somebody's saying something else about, all the effects of isolation. They're measuring it against something else, comparing it to all kinds of bad habits, right?
Loneliness, isolation. And
loneliness.
That often, stems from isolation is a huge problem. And as you can imagine, all of us psychologists, but I think other people as well, really got a twinge of panic when we, even read first about this concept of social distancing, just even the words, hearing the word social distancing before I kind of read the definition and understood why it's absolutely important to do it now. But, there's a huge concern on my part on, what's going to happen with all the lonely people. They're lonely already. We have epidemic of loneliness. And now we're saying, okay, let's engage in social distancing. What happens with people who are depressed, who kind of social distancing as it is, because that's what depression kind of makes you do. And yet we know that one of the prerequisites to get better is to rejoin the world and see people and move around, which is called behavioral activation, depression. Well, can't do that right now. What about anxious people who are, let's say agoraphobic or socially anxious or phobic? They tend to shrink their world and kind of stay home more. So of course, we work a lot, especially in kind of therapy that I do, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, to get it again, to face their fears, engage with the world. And so, I hear social distancing and thinking, oh my God, that's working against all of these processes, that we usually encourage patients to engage in. So it's going to be tough for a while. That's why I am concerned about people with psychological problems, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, or, more severely mentally ill, like with schizophrenia or addictions or bipolar. This is going to be a trying time. And I think we really, all of us individually, and then groups, whether they're faith-based groups or, just different groups or like AA groups, and then workplaces, really need to remember that this population is also vulnerable.
Because I think if you start, right? I mean, I'm kind of a pop psychology devourer, so I don't come from your perspective, but certainly if you start with anxiety or depression or any different milder or more severe forms of mental health challenges, then this type of panic, it just kind of compounds the situation, right?
Absolutely. Panic and isolation. And that's why I think, again, that while it's incredibly important, from a public health perspective, to remind people that the immunocompromised and elderly are at risk in terms of contracting, well, not contracting virus only, but suffering from it much more than the other people in the population. I think we need to remember the other vulnerable folks, and those are psychologically vulnerable folks, right? Because in this time of, isolation, quarantines, and social distancing, they're at risk for
Right.
getting worse. So.
Absolutely. So what about this? May be an entirely different branch of psychology, but I've read research and interviewed people that do research into the narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves. If that's at all relevant here, for all I know, it's another branch. But if that's at all relevant here, are there narratives that we can tell ourselves to reduce the jitters in this time of social distancing and just this weird twilight zone where suddenly everybody's life is different?
Yeah, I think one of the possible interesting ways of looking at things, right, or narratives or stories that we tell ourselves about it is this idea that this is really stressful time. This is transformational time. This is time, in nobody living remembers anything like this. And while it'll be very hard to endure, it'll be very stressful, there'll be a lot of sacrifices that will have to be made. There is also a chance that we will emerge from this with an increased sense of what matters in life, with an increased sense of resilience that, we can weather this, we can weather anything, right? We can, because there's this really interesting body of research about, people going through really hard, traumatic situations, so often, traumatic situations, and coming out of it with what psychologists term post-traumatic growth. And it doesn't mean that they also can, they can be also negatively affected, but a lot of people also experience this post-traumatic growth. And what it means is, this sense of, living more fully, being, appreciating life more, living more sort of, almost like vividly, and really appreciating kind of, carpe diem, appreciating every moment, every kind gesture, every flower. And also this sense of personal strength and resilience that, I now know I'm very strong. I can weather this, I can handle a lot of hard stuff. That's a pretty well described and supported phenomenon. If the narrative shifts from, this is just all horrible, let's all just survive it, to, well, let's survive it, and maybe psychologically there's some opportunity to even thrive as a result of it, then I think we would be better off.
That's wonderful. That's exactly the type of thing that I am looking for, and the very reason that I tracked you down on the internet and called you up. That is wonderful. So what have I not, just wrapping up here, Jelena, what have I not asked you? What did I neglect to ask you that might be just something to add as we kick out of this segment that would be of use? Any tips, any concepts? What escaped me?
One thing that I think we didn't mention that I've been thinking about also is the idea of gratitude. Again, it'd be odd to mention that during these really hard times. And yet, again, we do know that people, who take even a little bit of time, per day. It can be morning, it can be evening, it can be a diary, it can be just a list to reflect on, what are they grateful for in life? Who are they grateful for? What they're grateful for? And, we know that this contributes to psychological well-being, less anxiety, less depression, and so forth. And so remembering that, there are probably a lot of things that each of us is grateful for, even during these times, right? So what can we still be grateful for? Kind of, and it might be that, as you say, my two kids are home and we have this unexpected together time, be grateful that I can still do my work, right? Even amidst this kind of situation, that there's a teletherapy,
Right.
And I can be, grateful that my mother-in-law is in nursing home, that, they'll shut down so that they make sure that they, that the elderly there are not infected. So hopefully she's going to be spared. And just kind of, thinking, what can we still be grateful for? Because again, it reframes the situation a little bit. So.
No, I think that's wonderful. And I have my youngest, I come from 5, and my youngest brother, a former Olympic skier, has early onset Parkinson's, and he is a brilliant man and does lots of things, including global research on Parkinson's. And before he goes to bed every night, he comes up with, I think he's got 5 things that he thinks of that he's grateful for. And he focuses on that and talks about that. And I've incorporated that as well. I think that's a really good idea. I know gratitude is kind of a buzzword in therapy and psychology, but I think it is for a reason.
It
And
is.
you
It
know,
is.
and I think that's wonderful.
Yes.
So I hope you can kick out of this episode with what sounds very paradoxical, but a sense of gratitude. And I think we can, through seeking the greater good, looking out for your neighbor, and pulling out of this the stillness, and realize there is, as you say, there is room for growth in all of this. We're going to have to find a way to live a little differently for a while and embrace this.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. That well said.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you a million for joining me. And you sound like such a treasure trove of other researchers as well. So I'm going to tap into that. So,
Thank you.
So thank you so much. And I hope all you readers have found a breath of fresh air as I have in all the insights and collective wisdom of Jelena. I'm going to say this again. Kecmanovic. How was I on that pronunciation?
That's perfect. That's just perfect.
All right. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning into my Happiness podcast, where we explore how to get the best out of the empty nest. I hope you'll subscribe, write a review, and reach out to me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Check out my website, judyhollandauthor.com. Have a great day, and remember, make it happen.